All right, hello everybody. We are in week 3 of cells, and we're going to first recap what we discussed last week, so we're all on the same page. So, with that said, the first thing that we were talking about last week was prokaryotes. Prokaryotes are a fancy word for those organisms that are unicellular. Examples of unicellular organisms are bacteria and protists. The next word that we learned last week was eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are multicellular organisms. So this is a larger group of organisms on Earth. And examples are fungi, which is mushrooms, plants, and animals. We also talked about a bunch of different scientists that were important in the field of the cell theory as well as discovering the microscope. Robert Hooke was the first scientist that was extremely important. You will hear his name again and again and again in high school science classes as well as college science classes. He was the first scientist to identify cells and use the term cells. Lastly, we talked about the cell theory, and there were 3 main parts of the cell theory. The first one being all living things are made up of at least one cell. So that includes us. We are made up of more than one cell, and then bacteria would be made up of one cell. The second part is all cells come from pre-existing cells. If a cell needs to repair itself or replace itself, it has to do so from a pre-existing cell. It can't just magically make a new cell. And then the last thing is the cell is the most basic unit of life. Okay, so these main ideas came from the first PowerPoint last week from the cell theory. Okay, so we talked about prokaryotes, eukaryotes, Robert Hooke, as well as the cell theory. Next up, we talked about the cell structures. So we discussed 2 different types of cells last week. Take a second and think and look at the cell in front of you. So which one do you think it is, the plant or the animal cell? And it is the plant cell. There are some main reasons why it is the plant cell. So the first one is the rectangular shape. The second reason is it's green in color. So those are some main ideas and main concepts to know going forward. Another thing you could have looked for was, does it have a cell wall? So plant cells only have a cell wall, and plant cells also only have a chloroplast. So chloroplast, based off of the note sheet you were filling out last week, I told you to underline, circle, star, cell wall, and chloroplast because they only are in plant cells. Chloroplast helps them produce food through the process of photosynthesis, and the cell wall allows plants to just not fall over. Okay, they has that rigid structure to help them stand up straight and to be able to produce more and more cells. Okay, most of the other words we also went over because they also occur in animal cells. So next up is, what is it? Plant or animal cell? It is an animal cell, and the first thing you should have been able to figure out is because of the sphere shape. So it's a spherical shape, and that is an animal cell. Some other ideas that we're going to be talking about a lot today is the nucleus. The nucleus is in the center of the cell. It contains the DNA, chromosomes, and it tells the cell what to do. It's pretty much the brains of the cell. So we went through a lot of different vocabulary last week. If you want to, as we move through this PowerPoint today, you're going to be exposed to more vocabulary words, but feel free to take out the list from last week and reference that as we go through this. Okay, so we're going to be inside the cell, only focusing on animal cells. Okay, so keep this structure ingrained in your brain and make sure you know that as we go through, we're talking about the nucleus and only the nucleus, and we're talking about everything inside of it. Okay, so that's kind of what you're envisioning as we go through this. So we're going to be talking about mitosis today. Mitosis is a complex process, but once you understand the three main stages, you understand mitosis. All right, so I'm going to try my hardest to break it down for you. And again, you're going to be filling out a note sheet similar to the past 2 weeks. So some learning targets just to kind of let you know where we're headed with this PowerPoint and with this module. You're going to first understand, why do cells divide and how do they divide? So last week, again, we were talking about the structures that make up cells. Again, you're only thinking about the nucleus, but we're going to be talking about today, why are cells dividing and how do they divide? Why do we have to have them divide? So what are the three stages of the cell? How does cell division occur in unicellular organisms, so those that are prokaryotes? And then how do cells divide in multicellular organisms, so those that are eukaryotes? So how do they divide in us? I'm going to focus a lot on 1, 2, and 3, especially the last one because it applies to us. So as I stated before, you have a note sheet on Canvas, very similar to the note sheets that you filled out the last 2 weeks for me. So as we go through this, you're going to be taking notes. You can definitely copy this down on notebook paper and take a picture of it and upload it at the end of this module, or feel free to just download the Word document and type it up as we go through. So either way, whichever is easiest for you, feel free to do that. Okay? It's really important to not skip ahead. These words, we're going to keep building on these ideas. So if you do not understand these words, you're not going to understand what we're going to be talking about next week. So it's very imperative that you listen to this PowerPoint in its entirety and focus on the vocabulary words. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into cell division. Why do cells divide? Why do we have to have this sort of division going on? So cell division occurs in all organisms, whether they be single or multicellular organisms. And when cell division occurs, it's going to divide and create two separate brand new cells. So all cells need to make new cells. Why do you think cells would have to make a new cell? Within your body right now, sitting, listening to this PowerPoint, why do you think your skin cells, blood cells, hair cells need to be making new ones? Well, there's 3 reasons. The first one is growth. You are growing as I speak right now. And as you grow as an organism, your cells need to keep up with your growth. So if you don't have enough cells, you're not going to be able to continue to develop as an organism, as a human being. The second factor is repair. I'm going to tie in replace as well, because I'm going to just give you an example. Let's say when Miss Adamick was cleaning the windows a few days ago and standing on a ladder, I fell off and broke my arm. This really didn't happen. I'm okay, guys. But my body would have to repair and replace that broken bone. So my cells would have to work together in order to repair and replace my broken bone. Okay, so this whole entire cell division process is extremely important for organisms to continue to survive and thrive through life. This is what we call the cell cycle. And the cell cycle lasts from when a new cell is formed until the cell divides and forms 2 new cells. Okay, so right when I break my bone, my cells are starting to repair, replace, grow new cells, and the cell cycle does not end until I have brand new cells. This continues again and again and again, over and over and over, because we constantly need new cells, whether it be blood cells, hair cells, nerve cells. There's so many cells that make us up. There's millions upon millions. So what do you think is happening here? I have 2 pictures. The one on the left is a picture of the paramecium. Paramecium is a cool little microscopic organism that you can view under the microscope, and they're usually in warm, stagnant water. So what do you think? There's one little circle and then another little circle. Each circle represents a cell, and if they are still kind of joined in the middle as they are, you can kind of think, okay, they are probably replacing. So one cell is maybe dying off or needs to be repaired, so they are being replaced. So the other cell is being replaced. You could also say, you know, maybe growing. The starfish. What about the starfish? You can see little nubs on the starfish, and with that said, you can definitely assume that the starfish is repairing itself. Okay, so the paramecium would be growing, probably replacing though, and then the starfish would be repairing by the little nubs. All right, so now we know why cell division happens. We know that the cell cycle is extremely important in order for our cells to grow, repair, or replace. Now we're going to go inside the nucleus and talk about what's happening inside the nucleus during cell division. Okay, what's happening to that genetic material? So last week we talked about the structure of the nucleus. We discussed that DNA, chromosomes are both found inside the nucleus. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the key ideas on the cell division with the genetic material. Okay, so bear with me, focus on the big picture. Okay, and then I will also break it down. So DNA, as we discussed last week, is located in the nucleus. The nucleus controls the cell's activity. It's like the brain of the cell. If we have no nucleus, the cell's not going to know what to do. And it's probably going to die very, very, very quickly. Okay? Just like the human body. If we have no brain, the human body is not going to be able to function. Okay? Inside the DNA, we have what is called chromatin. Okay? These are kind of like spaghetti. Looks like long strands of spaghetti. They are thread-like and they're not dividing. So in the early stage of cell division, the chromatid is compacted, forming chromosomes. So what happens is the chromatin from the previous bullet point, so the chromatin compacts, forming chromosomes. And I'll show you what chromosomes look like in a second. The chromatids are held together by a centromere, apologize. And chromosomes consist of two parts, the chromatid and the centromere. All right, so now let's figure this out and let's visualize it. So here we are with our spaghetti. That's our chromatin. They're thread-like DNA, and it's not dividing. It's not connected to anything. It's just hanging out in the nucleus. You can think of the nucleus as the bowl where your spaghetti is being held, okay? And it's thread-like. Now it compacts, it winds up, and it forms a chromosome. Okay, so this is a chromosome. It's like a letter X. That's what I kind of think of it as. And in the center of the chromosome is your centromere. So that's what holds the chromosome together. All right, that's all you need to know based off of this. DNA is found in the nucleus. The chromatin is the thread-like structures, like spaghetti. And then the chromosomes make a formation of an X, and the centromere holds it together in the center. This picture brings it all together and recaps it. So we have the DNA, and you'll learn more about the DNA in ninth grade. So the DNA is a double helix and it's our cool little colorful double helix right here. It forms a spindle and it's found in the nucleus. All right, the chromatin, what we just talked about, is made up of DNA and proteins. It's those spaghetti strands that eventually form a chromosome. Chromosome, again, is the X shape, and then the centromere is in the center holding it together. This all is found in the nucleus. So you should be thinking to yourself right now, wow, the nucleus is really, really, really important to every single cell. If you don't have it, that's why it's not going to be able to function. It has no chromosomes, it has no DNA, so it will not know what to do with that organism. Chromosomes numbers. So every single organism has a specific number of chromosomes. That's what's so cool about organisms. The human body, we're going to again focus on humans most, are 46 chromosomes or 23 pairs. The 23rd pair, this is a fun fact, the 23rd pair decides on if you are a female or a male. So if you're XX or XY, XX, you are a girl, XY, you are a boy. You don't need to know that, it's just a little fun fact. And here's my little niece, Macy. She's so precious on her in her Easter outfit. And she's blowing bubbles because she was happy. So humans, 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. Macy's a girl, so she would be XX for her 23rd pair. Doggies have 78 chromosomes or 39 pairs. Goldfish has 94 chromosomes or 47 pairs. You should probably say like, whoa, why so many? They're so tiny. Again, this number is just specific to that organism. And then lettuce, 18 chromosomes or 9 pairs. So back to the cell cycle. What exactly is the cell cycle? We know why it happens for growth, repair, replace, and we know why it's important. Okay, the life cycle of an organism includes birth, growth, reproduction, and death. So those that are being born and developing, they have cells constantly being created as the organism grows. Okay, as the organism grows, reproduces, and dies, cells are also being formed. So the cell cycle is important for each aspect of birth, growth, reproduction, and even death. There are 3 stages of the cell cycle. The first one is interphase, the second one is mitosis, and the third one is cytokinesis. I'm going to point out to you right now that mitosis has 4 additional stages within it. Okay, so this is kind of, we're going into your note sheet right now if you're following along. So during this stage, a parent cell divides into 2 new cells. Remember, for the cell cycle to be successful, we start out with 1 cell that's needing to be replaced or repaired, and we are creating 2 additional cells. So 2 new cells are formed. They are always, always, always going to be identical to that parent cell. So here's a little fun picture right here on mitosis. So I got this from Amoeba Sisters. The little quote got cut off, and I apologize, the picture's a little blurry, but it says attack of the clones, because that's what happens during mitosis. You start out with 1 cell, 46 chromosomes, and then you are broken down into 2 new cells, each having the same number of chromosomes. That's what the 46 stands for. Okay, so now we are directly on your note sheet. So the first stage of the cell cycle is known as interphase. You can think of interphase as initial. They both start with IN. You know, I'm always trying to help you remember the words and what they stand for. So interphase, initial. During this stage, you have the cell is growing twice its size, And the DNA, remember, the DNA is inside the nucleus. The DNA and organelles are being duplicated. If we're creating more than one cell, so we're creating two new cells, we need the cell, the initial cell, to grow in size and to duplicate everything inside of it. So when we form two new cells, we have copies of each one, okay? So the two main parts is the cell grows twice its size and the DNA is being duplicated. So here's a picture of what interphase looks like at the microscopic level. So it's growing in size. It's probably twice its size at that point, and it's also duplicating everything. So it's going to look a hot mess within that cell because there's double of everything inside of it. During this stage, the cell is also able to carry out its normal life activities. So here is the whole entire cell cycle. I just wanted to kind of put this up here to show you that interphase is almost the entire time that the cell is reproducing. So as you can see, this is all of interphase. And then this part right here, part of the pie graph, is what we're going to be talking about through the next few slides. So the second stage is mitosis. I told you previously that mitosis also has 4 different stages, part of it. So if you're following along with your note sheet, we filled out interphase, and now we're going to talk about mitosis. Mitosis is ideally the easiest one for me to remember. You might say, Ms. Atomic, why? Because there's 4 different stages within it, but the main idea is easy to remember. Mitosis. Everything lines up in the middle, okay? Again, mitosis starts with M, middle starts with M. So when you think mitosis, think everything inside the cell that was duplicated, it's all slowly trying to jam its way into the middle of the cell. It's going to line up next to its twin. It's going to find its little buddy, and the cell is going to begin slowly to pull apart a smidge, okay? And those chromosomes, those organelles are going to go to opposite sides of the cell. So if you look at this picture right here, it's all the organelles are moving to opposite sides of the cell. Okay, so they first have to line up in the middle next to its twin copy. So there's 2 nuclei at this point. There's millions of ribosomes. There's 2 mitochondria. All of that is going to be in the middle. They line up next to its twin, and then they start to separate into opposite sides of the cell. Okay, we're going to further discuss each of these different ideas as I break apart the 4 different phases of mitosis. So the 4 additional stages of mitosis. We have prophase. During prophase, chromosomes coil up, so the chromosomes are forming that X shape. The membrane around the nucleus is breaking down, and the spindle fibers form. So the pink part is the nucleus membrane, and that's starting to break down. The spindle fibers are right here. You can barely see them, but they're starting to form. And then the chromosomes are forming their X shapes. Okay, so that's what's happening in prophase. In metaphase, this is where metaphase middle is coming into effect. So everything's lining up in the middle of the cell. You can see that the spindle fibers are completely formed at this point. And you can see that all the chromosomes are happy because they're in the middle next to their buddy. During the anaphase stage, this is when they're happy, but now they're like, ew, I don't like you. So they start to pull to opposite sides of the cell. Okay, so the chromosome copies divide and separate to opposite sides of the cell. The last stage of mitosis is the stage that the cell now has 2 identical nuclei. So they were here, they were pulling apart, and now they are completely separated, ready for the last stage of the cell cycle. Okay, so those four were part of mitosis. So we had prophase, where the chromosomes coil up, nucleus starts to break down. We have metaphase, where the chromosomes go to the middle of the cell. We have anaphase, where they begin to go to opposite sides of the cell. And then we have telophase, which two identical nuclei are going to be formed. Okay, last but not least, I want to see how much you know for this. Okay, so before moving on, see if what you think is going to be prophase, see what you think is going to represent metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the answers. So the first thing is, here's our parent cell. Our poor parent cell realizes that it needs to replace itself or repair itself. Okay, it's going to grow in size, it's going to duplicate everything inside of it, and this stage right here is going to represent prophase. And I'm sorry for my sloppy handwriting. The next one is it's lining up in the middle, starting to pull to opposite sides, but this is going to represent metaphase. Remember, metaphase, middle. The next one is the chromatids. The chromosomes are pulling apart to separate sides of the cell. So this would represent anaphase. And then last but not least, you have two separate identical daughter cells from the parent cell that was originally, and this is going to represent telophase. Okay, so those are the four stages of mitosis. Okay, four stages of mitosis. I hope that clears it up with kind of visualizing what's happening. The last stage, so remember, I don't want you to get confused. We have three overall stages of the cell cycle. Mitosis was that weird one that had four additional stages that we just went through. Okay, now we're back to what is our third stage of our overall cell cycle? Well, it's cytokinesis. Cytokinesis is the division of the rest of the cell. Okay, so this is when they pop off, forming two separate cells. So right here, that nucleus envelope, the membrane, is going to completely pop off, forming two separate identical cells. In animal cells, the cytoplasm pinches in. So this part is actually going to pinch in, forming that spherical shape. But in plant cells, it's actually going to form a plate. So that's where that square shape is formed. Okay, so that's the main difference. That's how animal cells and plant cells are created through cytokinesis. So just a little summary of our cell cycle. I said before that interphase is the longest stage. So this is when the cell is growing and duplicating everything inside of it. So that's the longest stage. It's going to take the most time. Mitosis is the next one. This is when we have our four additional stages of prophase, metaphase, everything lines up in the center. Anaphase, everything's starting to go to opposite sides of the cell. And then telophase, when they begin to separate. And then the last one, cytokinesis, is the shortest stage of the entire cell cycle. And that is when we have two identical cells that are formed. Okay, so the longest would be interphase. And then, interphase. And then the shortest would be cytokinesis. That might be something that you will see on your review at the end of this module. Okay, so this is the longest, and this is the shortest. So when cells become old or damaged, they die and are replaced with new cells. That is the main concept, again, that I talked about in the beginning of this PowerPoint on why cells would have to replace themselves. Okay, they're becoming old or damaged. They're going to have to replace themselves with a new cell. So let's do a little learning check again. So this is our second one. So number one, looking at that picture, what would that represent out of our mitosis phases? So we're back to mitosis because it's the most complex part of the cell cycle. So this would actually represent prophase. This is when the cell is growing, and this is when it is duplicating everything inside of it. Okay, the chromosomes coil up, and then the nucleus starts to break down. What about number two? This one's the easy one to usually be able to picture. So everything's lining up in the middle, the chromosomes are lining up in the middle. This is going to be metaphase. Remember, metaphase, middle, both of them start with the letter M. The third one, it is starting to go to opposite sides of the cell. So they join in the middle and then they're like, ew, we don't want to be close to you. They go to opposite sides of the cell, and this is going to create anaphase. One way to remember this is anaphase apart, and they both start with A. And then last but not least, this is going to represent telophase. You can think of telophase as two because the two new cells are being formed. Okay, so I hope again that clears things up, just visually looking at it, and a little helpful hint on the words and how to remember them. So at this point, you have your note sheet. I'm going to go ahead and go over the answers to the note sheet, and then you're going to go ahead and upload them. So the first one I'm going to talk about is interphase. The middle column was probably the hardest part to fill out for you as you were working through this PowerPoint. So no need to stress out, because again, I'm going through the answers and then you can upload them. So interphase, the DNA copies itself and it's in the form of chromatin. So this is the appearance. So important events, the cell's growing, it's also duplicating everything inside of it. The DNA is also being duplicated. Okay, so replication is the same word as duplicating. Next up is mitosis. Again, mitosis has 4 phases, as you can see. So the first phase of mitosis is prophase. This is when the chromosomes coil up. The important events, the nuclear envelope disappears and the spindle fibers are starting to form. The next phase of mitosis is metaphase. So chromosomes line up in the middle. Remember, metaphase, middle. And the spindle fibers connect to chromosomes. The next phase of mitosis is anaphase. Remember, anaphase apart. So they're dividing and moving apart, and they are pulling apart so far that they're going to opposite poles of the cell. The last one for mitosis is telophase. The chromosomes uncoil back into chromatin. This is when there are 2 new nuclei that are going to be formed. And last but not least, we have cytokinesis. Chromosome appearance is in chromatin, and we have division that's going to occur until we have 2 complete separate cells. Okay, so this is the end of this PowerPoint. I hope this chart and the visuals help you understand the definitions of the cell cycle. But again, remember that the cell cycle is extremely important. Know these 3 stages: interphase, mitosis, and cytokinesis. And then know the 4 stages that mitosis is broken into: prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. You can upload your note sheet to Canvas, and please use the note sheet as you complete the quiz. All right, and Again, as always, let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I'm always available by Teams and through email.